and we could profile some of the characteristics that we know. And those would be issues where these individuals, they're unto themselves, which provides probably way too much time and introspection and anger that builds up in them. They're also what we refer to in criminology as hedonistic. These types of school shooters really are deriving pleasure, as terrible as that sounds, from beginning till the end, the thinking about the killing, the act itself, and then the aftermath.
Once again, our nation has experienced a mass casualty shooting at a school. Today on Bets and Badges, we're discussing these active shooter incidents. Who are these individuals committing these incidents or these mass casualty shootings? What's the motivation? And what do we know about them? And where do we go from here? I am Robert Asencio, and with me, I have my colleague and co-host, retired police chief and military historian, David Magnuson. Welcome, David.
Hey, good afternoon to everybody.
Today we have the honor of interviewing and getting the analysis perspective of criminologist, professor, and TV analyst, Dr. Debbie Goodman. Welcome, Doctor.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, David. It's such an honor and privilege to join you today. And our hearts go out to our victims and our condolences and utmost respect.
Well, Doctor, what do you know about this incident that we can share with the public?
Certainly. Well, again, this is always shocking and so sad and quite frankly sickening that a young person, the individual's name is Colt Gray, 14 years old, an attendee at Apalachee High School in Georgia. And he brought an AR-15 to school, whereby he killed, as you said at the introduction, 4 individuals, 2 teachers, 2 classmates. And we try to figure out the why, and we could profile some of the characteristics that we know. And those would be issues where these individuals, these students, tend to be really apart from rather than a part of mainstream society. They're not going to be individuals involved in sports or dance or chess club or theater. Really, they're unto themselves, which provides probably way too much time and introspection and anger that builds up in them. They do tend to have feelings of being grandiose. Although they're alone, they tend to fantasize about being big one day, if you will, where people will know who they are. They're also what we refer to in criminology as hedonistic. These types of school shooters really are deriving pleasure, as terrible as that sounds, from beginning till the end, the thinking about the killing, the act itself, and then the aftermath. So another potential area for us to take a look at, if we just peer back into some of our history of school shooters and the Columbine case in Colorado, Klebold and Harris, and 13 decedents. Now, those shooters self-inflicted. We look at Sandy Hook, 26 deaths. Adam Lanza, that shooter, he self-inflicted. But then here we are, meaning we, the 3 of us in Florida, and of course we followed the case for 5 years, Nicholas Cruz and the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting, whereby 17 individuals died. He did not self-inflict. However, he's been sentenced, convicted, and will serve 17 life sentences. And now, present day, this Colt Gray, where we're first going to find out about him, he did not self-inflict. But what's interesting, both David and Robert, and certainly the viewers, is that this case really reminds me of the Ethan Crumley case. And just a quick reminder there, Ethan Crumley, an attendee at Oxford High School in Michigan, was 15 years old when he brought the gun to school, killing 4 of his classmates. Now, he too has been sentenced to 4 life sentences, no parole. But why we remember that case, and particularly I think in relation now to the Colt Gray case, is that Mr. and Mrs. Crumley, James and Jennifer Crumley, a historic outcome whereby they were sentenced involuntary manslaughter leading to 15 years each. So it really is something involving so many levels and layers for all of us to think about, to analyze, to comment on.
It's as if these individuals who are mass casualty shooters or school-age shooters are playing a game. You know, it's like who can get the next highest score.
It's my understanding, first of all, that that Colt, they found out, had a great interest in the Parkland shooting. So there's that sense that we've talked about before, where they pay homage to the past, to those that have committed the crimes in the past. But, you know, the tip that led them last year to this 13-year-old brandishing weapons, right, came from Discord, which is a gamer platform. So there's that game part again.
You know, in police work locally in South Florida, on the streets, if you will, on the mean streets of where crime occurs, frequently in Miami-Dade County. Dating back to the early 2000s, we saw an increase in violent crime, where overall crime was going down, but the acts of violent crime were actually going up. Part one, violent crimes, specifically ones of use of weaponry, firearms, deadly weapons. And what we saw was that a lot of these crimes, a good portion of these crimes, these person crimes, have been perpetrated by juvenile offenders. Is there a connection between the violence of what we see on the streets to these school shootings?
So I would say yes, that there is a correlation between the overall crime occurrences and then what trickles into juvenile crime. And David's point, and you as well, Robert, about the whole game mentality, I think that's worthy of pointing out as well, that these kids, yes, they play games, but are we going to say that Call of Duty and some of these other types of violent interactive games that they're playing are leading them to do it? That's a question mark for me. I don't really think so. I think that these kids are really so angry just within and at society from the outside that they're eventually wanting to take revenge. And it is a theory that I've created in relation to a lot of these high profile crimes. I call it JAR, J-A-R, jealousy, anger, revenge. And ultimately, I think the kid shooters, the juveniles who are doing this, are jealous of other kids who may be more socialized, more connected, more popular. They become angry that they themselves are not really a part of anything, but rather apart from, and they take the ultimate revenge, and that's the killing of another. And even when David was commenting how this Colt Gray seemed to be enamored by Nicholas Cruz and followed that case, that's another level and layer, like the onion, so many different areas to peel back here and unpack. But that's another concern that I would have as a criminologist, the ripple effect of other kids seeing about, hearing what's happened. Are they starting to think about it? So we know our local, state, and federal officers and agents do a tremendous job, but they have their hands full because as we speak, we may have kids around the globe considering this as well, because all of a sudden, this Colt Gray that nobody knew about or heard about is the lead story.
David, what about your experiences with, mass casualty shooters in your 35 plus years of law enforcement?
I mean, there's two things to break down. We can have the mass casualty shooters, or we can have the young kids that are out and about that don't seem to have any conscience to take the life of somebody. Not mass casualty per se. They're not going into schools per se, but they'll be on a corner and they'll see Johnny on the corner, and for whatever reason, they don't think twice about killing that person. Now, what I found very interesting, since 2018, 6 of the 9 deadliest shootings in this country were by 21 and younger. And you say, okay, from 1949 to 2017, only 2 of the deadliest shootings in that wide time frame were by people under 21. So something has changed. Is it the value of life isn't quite where it used to be? I mean, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a sociologist. I couldn't tell you that. I can tell you I have seen in the mean streets of Miami what people under 21, 17, 18, 16, perhaps maybe 15, they didn't think twice on taking the ultimate act of taking somebody else's life. And you walk away shaking your head. What are they thinking?
ABC News, ABC, I guess the National, put out roughly 2 years ago that described the shooters by the numbers. And interesting enough, it mentioned that 90% of the school-age shooters were suicidal at the time of their shootings. 80% of those school-age shooters were in crisis, and a high percentage of individuals, nearly 100% of them, had some type of psychological, emotional variance from a normal mainstream child.
Excellent points, and we could speak on suicidal ideation, and hence why when we look at some of the cases wherein the shooters themselves self-inflicted, I would maintain that that probably was the singular goal, that the shooter himself, at the moment we're talking about male shooters. We have had female shooters, by the way, but pretty historic. Brenda Spencer was one of our first female shooters, age 16, killed a janitor and a principal right across the street from her home. But it's very rare to have the female. But I think that is the singular issue, that there's mental health concern, there's psychological circumstances, and ultimately the kids who want to kill themselves, we know that that too is on the uptick since our last 3 to 5 years, if we want to date back to 2020 to the present, perhaps starting with the pandemic, where we see an uptick in suicides among our teenagers. But again, looking at the cases we've referenced, Klebold and Harris from Columbine, they self-inflict, and yet they take 13 innocent lives with them. Adam Lanza, 26 people deceased. By the way, he killed his mother first, as we know, kills mom, then kills the 26 individuals at Sandy Hook, and then himself. But yet, isn't it interesting to compare and contrast those cases to the Nicholas Cruz, who gave up willfully to a local police officer who made the arrest, and allegedly this Colt Gray did the same thing. The school resource officer was able to manage that situation and de-escalate and arrest him. And also with Ethan Crumley. So I think there's definitely the correlation of mental health, but I do want to be clear on something. Even when I speak about that, I don't think these kids are insane, because legally, if we look at insanity and we look at the percentages and percentiles just throughout the country among shooters, less than 2% of whom are legally declared insane. So to be insane, it would mean the individual does not know what he or she is doing, and the individual does not know what he or she is doing is wrong. So even among the juvenile shooter, very rare to have somebody insane. I think this Colt Gray knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted attention. He wanted to be known, and here we are discussing him.
Yeah, how about the aspect too, for instance, Crumley, Gray, Lanza, and I'm sure more, of enabling parent or parents? How does that fit into that?
I think we have to look at parental liability. It's an honor and a privilege, in my opinion, to be a parent. And we also know that that comes with a lot of responsibility throughout the entirety of the child's life. But it's unreasonable and unrealistic to think that if the child is hurt, meaning even a broken arm or leg, that parent is running to the doctor's office to get it fixed. Yet, if the child is hurt emotionally, mentally, it still requires the same due diligence, yet some way, somehow, and I speak on these issues to the parent-teacher associations, that as parents, we simply cannot be the ostrich in the sand with the head down, saying, not my kid, not my household, not my issue. because we're doing a terrible disservice to children if and when we do that. So I agree with David that clearly in the Cruz case and Klebold and Harris and Crumley and now Colt, where are these parents and what are they doing to get their children the help they need?
But one of the things that I am seeing here, and I wanted to get your thoughts on, both of your thoughts on, is how these incidents have changed or shifted the landscape of perception and reality of life. And I want to point out a couple things. So watching watching interviews of some of the students who are considered walking wounded. I mean, I get chills just thinking about this because there were a couple students that described their actions during the in progress of the shooter's activity as the shooter was rolling through the school as he shot and moved beyond the casualties. In one instance, one of the coaches, one of the male teachers who was shot, was down. The students attended to him, and the description of the care, the first aid that they rendered, was that of comparable to what we see soldiers on the battlefield rendering their down colleagues. You know, one of the students said that he immediately recognized, you know, it was a chest wound, that immediately put pressure on the wound to stop the bleeding. And then they drug him. They drugged the victim. He and a couple others drugged the victim into the classroom, lifted the shirt to see where the wound was, where there was an exit wound. I mean, this is stuff that you don't generally see and would not see in a high school students acting, this is not normal behavior. You as a professor, how do you see the change and how are the students reacting to these news incidents?
My students were very, very concerned about what happened and wanted answers. And sometimes we simply just don't have the answers. You know, the main question they want the answer to is why? Why did this happen? This did not have to happen. But they did say something interesting in class. I know it's controversial. It might lend itself to our conversation, but perhaps moving forward in the future, do we need to take a look at the electronic surveillance and the monitoring and wanding of the kids coming in to take a look at the backpacks and make sure there are no weapons coming into school settings?
Pre-Columbine, school safety was considered, it's little school kids, they have their fights, but generally, and every now and then you have some type of incident that rose to, I guess, violence level, but it was not known, and then, I mean, never considered as a imminent danger to society. Now, post Columbine, law enforcement began to put priority on school safety, SRO assignments, mapping of the schools when responding to the schools. I mean, there was a whole list of protocols that were established, from unification, evacuation, lockdowns. How do you see it as a chief, as a former chief and executive law enforcement officer, the shifting in the landscape, and how much farther do we have to go?
Well, it appears to me, sadly, that hiding, running, and fighting has replaced reading and writing and arithmetic.
Some
Sad.
areas, yeah.
It's sad. But what was a big part for law enforcement in Columbine, and you've seen it work in some places, and it hasn't worked as it should have in others, was the police response. First officers on the scene go in. Columbine was a perfect example that you can't wait for a cavalry to mount up. If you're on the scene and you're armed, neutralize the threat. As a chief, or retired chief, but as a chief, your focus, and I can tell you from Havelock, it was a military town, and so in a small geographical area, there was one high school, two junior highs, five elementary schools. So there was SROs, and because it was a military town, the thing I put forth was roving. Don't be sitting in an office roving. Not everybody's going to come in at a certain time, you know, and it could be the luck of the draw. While you're roving, you see somebody coming around. It's got to be a proactive approach, because this is not the end of it. You know, just by the odds alone, if you're gonna factor in how many have taken place in the last year, you're probably due for another one of these incidents. And then, I'd say by November.
You know, we saw rapid action tactics, RAT, come after Columbine or shortly after Columbine, where Columbine, if you look at, you do the case anatomy, you'll see that the officers, they said, perimeterized the school. They had the perimeter, and then they waited for SWAT to come out, right? Meanwhile, people getting slaughtered literally inside the school, right? Then from there, we had a couple other incidents, but then it was rapid action tactics were developed. First 4 units on the scene, or first couple of units on the scene, go after the threat, right? Move past casualties, go right to the subjects. I know this because that's part of an area that I specialize in law enforcement. So close quarter combat, both in the military and law enforcement. So that's changed. Also, the psychological perspective, if you will, of law enforcement, the readiness when it comes to coming up against armed young subjects, right? Whether it's inside a school, whether it's at the Aurora Theater House, or in Buffalo at the supermarket, right? We have begun to look at responding to these perpetrators in a different way.
How do you stop it? How do you bring normalcy back to people when you don't know what tomorrow is going to bring because of acts like this?
I think this is a new norm. I think to say anything
Think about
different,
what you just said.
yeah,
A
this is
new
a new
norm.
norm. It is a new norm
Wow.
because we can't go back.
But here's the narrative, right? It's a past narrative when we look at the cases preceding. Now it's the present narrative dealing with the case upon us and the ripple effect here. And as you're both saying, the sadness and the despair and devastation and conversations the kids are having among one another and with their parents. And now the future, you know, David's most likely right, unfortunately, so that in a month to 2 months from now, we may see another catastrophe. But really, wherein lies the solution? You know, what should we be looking toward? What do we need to be doing in this society to send children to school, K through 12, college, university, to be safe? And without worry, are they coming home?
I guess the problem is the access to firearms, high-powered firearms, the availability and accessibility to them. It gets it in the hands of these kids or these individuals who are walking amongst us that are not well, intent on causing harm and reaping havoc.
Well, that is a weapon of harm and havoc for sure. I mean, it's no more deadly than a Glock in the right hands of somebody that knows how to use it. But the ability to take out a lot more people with greater devastation, you can't compare the two.
There is a theory we have in criminology. It's called the Lilliputian theory. And again, the smallest of people want to be large, and it has nothing to do with stature and height, but everything to do with mindset and mentality. And so I feel it's these kids who are being ignored, who are not part of their mainstream peer group, who are ultimately crying out for help. And this is how they do it. Notice me, look at me. Hey, I'm important too. I want attention. And they take the worst of weapons to do this. And even if we believe in the Second Amendment, there has to be an asterisk by that statement, where not in the hands of young, disturbed individuals. No weapons.
All right, so where do we go from here? What will be the closing remarks here?
I really think that a circumstance like this, a mass shooting, a school shooting, is a table, and we need a lot of parties to be present at the table to come up with the solutions. And that would include the students themselves, parents, politicians, law enforcement professionals, community, religious leaders, to all have a say in this. And again, there's no singular answer, there's no easy solution, but we must come up with solutions. And I think we need to hear from a lot of different people about how best to go about this.
I'm not a pessimist, perhaps a realist, not a naysayer, but I've often felt if Sandy Hook didn't move the needle, nothing's going to. it's going to take something more than 4 people to get people that are dug in their heels about this weaponry to move forward. Because, you know, really, that's going to be the first step. That's going to be the first step to take that away to take that away. This, like you said, with these people that feel small. What can make you feel bigger if you got ill intent than a weapon such as that? Nobody's going out and say, well, let me grab a Derringer and go wreak havoc, you know, or a 38 snub nose. When does it stop? What has to happen for this to stop? Apparently, the attempted assassination of a president didn't seem to push that issue.
I can say this emphatically. There's very little will amongst the political leadership in the state of Florida and across this country to really address these issues. Now, we can debate why that is, many reasons, but at the end of the day, our fellow Americans are getting killed. And that's unacceptable.